Hey everybody. So tonight I'm going to be starting an artisan bread loaf. This is one of the first bread loaves that I learned to make on my journey to learn how to bake breads. And I really like this as a beginner's bread recipe because it's actually considered a no-knead bread recipe. So that takes out one of the essential skills for baking bread, but still gives you this amazing loaf. And honestly, this is one of my go-to loaves. I still make it all the time, even though I feel more confident in making other types of bread that do require kneading. So I'm going to start out by taking my glass that I know will hold the amount of water I need. I'm going to zero it on my scale, and I'm going to fill my glass with 300 grams of water. So that will end up being about 75% baker's percentage of water. So you want this water to be warm but not hot. People typically say you want it about 100 degrees Fahrenheit or so, but it really doesn't need to be that precise. As long as it's not actively cold, as long as it's not actively hot, it'll do what you need it to. So we're going to just get this to be about 300 grams here, and I like to be pretty precise. I find that helps with the consistency, but again, if you're a gram off or so, doesn't matter. So we got a nice 300 grams there. And now I'm going to start by adding just 1 gram doesn't matter, 2 grams of yeast. And this scale is not the most precise, but it does the job because you don't have to be super precise about this, as long as you're really pretty close. 2 grams. And then we'll give this a good mix. So this process here is called blooming your yeast. And this is the yeast I use, this Fleshman's bread machine yeast. It doesn't really matter the brand, as long as you get what's called instant yeast. Instant yeast means you don't really have to do this step of blooming your yeast, which allows it to activate and make sure it's not dead or dormant or anything. But I've had a little bit of trouble in the past when I didn't do this step even with instant yeast. And I find that whenever I do this step, it makes the whole process much more smooth and consistent and works without fail. So I still bloom my yeast just a little bit. Typically with like active dry yeast, you would have to wait like 10-15 minutes to start seeing some bubbles, but I just let this sit until I finish measuring out my flour and salt, and by that point it's close enough. So we're going to take our big bowl, and we're going to put it on the scale and zero it out again. And this time we're going to measure out 400 grams of flour. This is bread flour. It has a little bit higher of a protein percentage than AP flour does, and that extra gluten protein is what helps give breads that light, airy texture that we're really looking for. So we're going to measure out 400 grams of flour. And so when we're talking about baker's percentages, the 400 grams of flour is going to be the 100% that we refer to. So everything will be based off of the flour as far as the percentages go. And I'll make sure that I leave a copy of all the percentages that I use down in the comments. So you could really scale this up. Like if you know that you are going to be making 2 breads at once, you could double everything. You keep, as long as you keep all the ratios the same, it'll work out just fine. Okay, and now I'm going to go for, it's usually 10 grams of salt. I find that when I bring it up to 11 grams of salt, that little extra bit makes it taste just a little bit better to me. I like my foods a little bit saltier, so I'm going to go for 11 grams of salt. There we go. Oh, 12 grams is a little over. That's okay. And so you can see here in our yeast now, there's these little bubbles forming in there. That's not just from mixing it. That's how part of the reason we can tell that our yeast is active enough. So I'm going to give this a quick mix with my hands just to make sure the salt is evenly distributed. We don't want the yeast to come in too much direct contact with that salt. The salt can be a little bit harmful to the yeast, but when it's all mixed through, it's fine. So I'm going to give my water and yeast mixture here one last stir, and then I'm going to dump it in. And I'm going to mix this all up with just my hands. I find getting your hands in there is the easiest way to do this, but if you rather take a big spoon or if you have a dough whisk, that also works just fine. So we don't need to really knead this. We're not trying to form any gluten here. The yeast bubbling through the dough and eating and doing its thing overnight and up to through like 24 hours or so is what is going to knead the dough for us. We're going to make the yeast do the work. So right now I'm just mixing it enough until I get all the little bits of dry flour incorporated and moistened. So I got that all in there, and I'll pick any of this extra dough off my hands. And then we're gonna let this sit overnight, and I'll do something again in the morning, which I will show you when the time comes. The last thing I want to show you for tonight is how to get a lot of this excess flour off your hands, dough off your hands. It can be really extra sticky. What you do is you grab just a pinch more flour, and you take it and you rub it into your hands, and that really helps you get a lot of that excess flour off. You can see my hands are significantly cleaner than they were before, but of course I will still go and wash my hands before I'm done with this. But for leaving this dough overnight, we want to cover it so it doesn't dry out. And putting, I like to just use like a pot lid that I know fits on my bowl really well. That's usually what I go with. Lots of people do plastic wrap, which is totally fine. You could even do a plate on this or another inverted bowl. Whatever works best for you, whatever you have that works for your setup is fine. So I will see you guys again in the morning. All right, good morning, everyone. And so I have not touched this bowl since we left it here last night. And you can see that it has risen quite a lot from how it was before. You can still see, especially like right in here and in some other spots, there's still a lot of dry flour left. So we want to reincorporate that dough and give it a mix to make sure that the yeast has access to all of the different flour such that it can feed and do its work and knead the dough and be able to become bread. So we're just going to give this a few turns. And what that means is I'm going to swoop my hand in here, grab the dough, pick it up, and fold it over, just like this. So you can see it's nice and stretchy now. It's a little sticky, but not too bad. And we want to pick this up and go around the dough all the way over to reincorporate. This is, I'm going to call it giving this a turn. We want to just do about 4, 5, 6 of them. Doesn't really matter. And then I like to bring it into a little bit of a ball and flip it over. So now we've got all of that dough incorporated into the dry flour, reincorporated into our dough. And I'm going to leave this again for another couple hours until we'll do our shaping for our final rise and then bake it. So I'll see you again in a few hours. All right, it's been about 6 hours since the last update, and now it's time to shape this bread for its final proof, and then we can go to bake it. So you can see we've left it for a while now, and it's risen a bunch. So we're going to flour our dough, our work surface, and the pan that we're going to be putting this in. Take some of this flour, put it over the dough, lightly flour our work surface, and then I'm going to heavily flour this pan because we're going to let it rise on here for a while, and then this will be the pan that we bake it on. And I like to put down quite a bit of flour here. It helps make sure that I can easily pull my dough off when I'm done getting this. So we're just going to pull this out of here. And we just want to make this have a nice topped top on it so that it looks nice and presentable when we're baking. I'm going to take and just do kind of a couple more of those turns in here. Not as aggressively as before, but I just want to try to get like kind of that ball shape. Tuck it in a little bit. And this is a good time to see having some of those air bubbles in here, so we're just going to pop those to try to get it nice and smooth and taut. You see that's pretty good. And then one other trick to make it a little rounder is you get a drier part of your board so it sticks, and you smush it in like a circle like this. Helps bring in the bottom and get it into a more circular shape. And again, it doesn't have to be super perfect. That's probably close enough. So I'm going to take it and place it in the center of my pan so that when we leave it for about an hour, it can rise. I'm also going to cover it with a clean towel that I'm going to flour up a bit. See, this towel's a little stained, but it's been through the wash recently, so it's clean. some flour on here, and I'll cover this. Now we'll give this about an hour, and in that time we'll be ready to bake. In the meantime, maybe about 30 minutes from now, I'm going to preheat my steam oven because I have a steam oven. But another really good tool for baking breads without a steam oven is if you have a Dutch oven. The one difference when using a Dutch oven versus a steam oven is that you'd want to make sure to preheat your steam oven in the oven for about an hour as well at the cooking temperature of 450. We want that Dutch oven to be at temperature with the oven when we go to put our bread in. So I'll see you in, it's been about an hour, and so now the bread is fully proofed and all shaped and ready to go into the oven. Look at that, you can see that it's risen nicely. So the last thing we have to do is to score it, and then we have to throw it in the oven. I have the oven preheated to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. I have convection on, and since I have a steam oven, I have it set to 100% steam. I'm going to bake it at 100% steam for about 5 minutes, and then my oven will automatically switch to a dry heat. That steam will allow the bread to rise a lot more, and then the dry heat will help to crisp up and really cook it through and make the outside, well, nice and crispy. So we're going to give this one nice, long, quick, deep score down the center. Oh, actually first, before I forget, I want to get my scoring tool a little bit floured up so that it won't stick as bad. Now we'll score it. And I'm going to just correct the spot where I made a little mistake. So that's a nice deep score, and now we can put it in the oven. So that'll be in the oven on steam for about 5 minutes, and then it'll be off steam for maybe another 15 to 20 minutes or so until it's got a nice dark brown outside, and we'll pull it out and have nice baked bread. All right, so let's pull this bread out of the oven. I think it's been finished baking. Maybe it could be a little bit browner, but it's been there for about 27 minutes now on the dry cycle. The dry heat, so I think that's probably enough. So let's pull it off of here. Yeah, that sounds good. You want it, when you knock on it like that, you want it to sound pretty hollow. So in the steam oven, we got a really nice big rise to it. I think this came out great. The only difference with making it in a Dutch oven, like I mentioned earlier, is that you might not get quite as much rise, but still doing it in that Dutch oven will help a lot more than if you didn't use any kind of steam trapping device at all, which is what the Dutch oven helps with. The one change I would do for baking this in a steam oven is instead of doing 5 minutes on steam, and I ended up going around 25 minutes on the dry heat, I would do about 20 minutes with the lid on in the Dutch oven, and then I'd pull the lid off and then bake it for another 25 to 30 minutes. And then normally, right after you pull a bread out of the oven, you'd want to let it cool pretty much completely. That'll help set the insides and give you a more consistent final product. I'm going to cut into this now to show all you guys what is going on the inside here. But yeah, again, typically I would let it cool down. I do find that when you let it sit and cool, that will also soften the outside. You can see right now, we have a very crispy, crackly outside, which is exactly what I was going for. When you let it cool, it's going to soften a bit. So what I like to do is, I usually bake this ahead of time. Well, I didn't have time to do that today. And if I'm going to serve it for like a party or just for dinner as a side, I will leave it whole uncut and put it back in the oven on dry heat at 450 for 10-15 minutes or so, and that will re-crisp up the outside, and then when you go to cut it, you'll have a super crisp, nice, flaky outside and a soft inside. But we're going to cut into this today so that you guys can see what it looks like. We're going to cut off just a little piece on the outside here. Ooh, that's really hot. You can see all that steam coming off, and we got some nice air pockets in here for a nice crust. So I'm gonna spread a little bit of butter on this, because who doesn't like bread and butter? This will probably melt a lot because this is still super hot. Ouch, 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 ouch. Let's take a bite. I love this spread. This is one of my favorite things to make. It's probably the thing I've baked more so than anything else I've ever made in the kitchen. And it's still amazing to this day. Super flaky outside, nice soft squishy inside. It's great as a side, or what I plan to use it for later is I'm going to slice up the bread and make some hot panini sandwiches, and this will be so perfect for that. I like using artisan bread for something like that over just some standard sandwich loaf. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and have a good night, everybody. Eat well. Bye.